This is the Graceful Atheist Podcast. Welcome to the Graceful Atheist Podcast. My name is David, and I am trying to be the Graceful Atheist. We continue to have an amazing community that is building in the Facebook group Deconversion Anonymous. Please consider joining and being a part of the community. Arlene runs a weekly Tuesday evening hangout where the community discusses the previous week's podcast. If you would like to be a part of that, please join the Deconversion Anonymous Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/deconversion. A while back, I had asked the community for anyone who would be interested in maintaining the Graceful Atheist YouTube channel. If that is you, please reach out to me. From a technical point of view, it's fairly trivial. Generally speaking, an image and then an audio wave of the podcast audio, and that's about it. But it is more than I have time to do. And it's amazing how many people actually listen to the show on YouTube, which surprises me, but it is a thing. So if you are interested in doing that, please reach out to me at gracefulatheist@gmail.com. Special thanks to Mike T for editing today's show. And a note that I must have made a mistake on the mic that was active. So if I sound like I'm in a tunnel, that is not Mike T's fault. It was mine. On to today's show. My guest today is Cooper. Cooper is a mother of 6. Cooper mainly was a part of the Calvary Chapel tradition. And throughout her life, a number of themes came up. One of which was that because she was a woman, she needed to sit under the authority of the men around her. And the other was the perfectionism that was built into Christianity that because of Cooper's personality, she took on very seriously at a very young age. Her deconstruction was a liberation not only of the religious ideas, but into her own autonomy as a fully autonomous human being. Here is Cooper to tell her story. Cooper, welcome to the Graceful Atheist Podcast.
Hi, how are you?
Very well, very well. Cooper, I think you've already been a active member of the Deconversion Anonymous community group, and you reached out to me to come and tell your story, so I'm really excited to hear it.
Yeah, I'm really excited and nervous to kind of go through it.
Yeah. No worries. There's no wrong way to tell your story. So we always begin with, what was your faith tradition growing up?
Okay, so I was born into a family that already had pretty heavy religious backgrounds. My mom was raised Catholic, and my dad was raised in Southern California, like that newer age Christianity that came with the Calvary Chapel movement.
Yeah.
And so I was basically born into it completely. I started out in a church, where it was a really small community, and very family oriented. And that was pretty much my community. That's what I knew to be family outside of family, because I was born in California, but then we moved to the Pacific Northwest very early on.
Okay.
So my family was my church. I had my mom and my dad, my brother, and then everybody that, we spent Wednesdays and Sundays and every day together that's considered a church day, I guess.
Right. If the doors are open, you're there.
Yeah, exactly. So, pretty early on, I was taught from the very beginning, like I only listened to Christian music. I was memorizing Bible verses from when I could talk. Mm-hmm. My parents really immersed us in it. And so there really wasn't any other way of life that I was familiar with. The church that I went to, honestly, I tried to kind of figure out what denomination that it was. And I think it was as close to non-denominational as you can get, but it probably had a denomination. I just couldn't find it because it's not a functioning church anymore. But I don't really have bad memories of that church. It was foundational for me. A lot of love. We were very close with the pastor and their family, and we would spend the night there. And there wasn't really any bad blood for why we left. I think it was just we had moved in town, and it was just a closer drive for us to go to the other church that we ended up at. But
Mhm.
a lot of good memories, a lot of first friendships at that church. Nothing really bad, like I said, sticks out in my mind. VBS was a part of my life, and
Okay.
yeah, so I know all the Father Abraham songs and the songs about Noah. It's
Yeah.
just that was very, very foundational for me. So having my brother as my only real playmate outside of church, because my parents really did keep us away from a lot of other people. And when we did hang out with other people, it was very controlled. And it was my job to evangelize. Even, I mean, I have memories as young as 6 being in
Wow.
conversation with one of my friends. She's still one of my best friends to this day. Just, do you know Jesus? And it not being her lifestyle. So she was like, no. So, I took that on as, oh my gosh, this is my chance to get my first one.
That's right.
So
6-year-old evangelist.
yeah. Oh man. Yeah. And it's funny. My dad's family would always say when we would go visit that, man, she's trying to baptize everyone, because it was just such a passion for me, because that's all I knew. So that was what I took as law. And I wanted to make sure everyone had that truth.
Yeah. We've commented before that children tend to take it more seriously than the adults do. So the
Yeah.
adults tell their children, this is real. And the children take that as read and act
Yep.
on it. And so it definitely sounds like that was the case in your story.
Oh, for sure. And I mean, it was so deeply ingrained in me that I took perfectionism very serious.
Mm.
So I resonated really well with one of your other guests. And of course, I'm going to forget names, but it was a missionary situation.
Okay.
And she was saying how she would sit and rack her brain to find something to confess.
Yes.
But she had done so many things that, good things. And there was that she would try to find something wrong. And I remember vividly having the idea of listening to oldies music. I mean, oldies, like
Right.
the Beach Boys, and thinking that was something to confess because it wasn't something that was giving God glory.
Mm.
So I would just feel awful. I remember laying in my bed at night in second, third grade and just feel awful for sitting and listening to a station that wasn't just about Jesus. So I definitely struggled a lot with perfection, which led into a lot of my issues later on in life. Yeah, so I grew up in that church, and we ended up switching probably when I was in 4th or 5th grade, and we started going to a Calvary Chapel here. And
Okay.
my dad was just stoked. That was what he knew. And so we just dived right in. And at that time, that Calvary Chapel was really small as well. So it was that same family community, and we were just building friendships. And the doctrine was just the pastor we had at the time was very much a history buff, and he was very, very smart. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that they definitely targeted the youth and just getting us into a place where we knew the foundations so that it couldn't be shaken.
Right.
And so I spent a lot of my time at this Calvary Chapel. It ended up becoming my life. We did Awana, which I'm not even sure if that's a thing anymore, but it was huge.
It's pretty, yeah, it was definitely common. I assume that it still exists. So yeah.
Yeah. So it was like a big deal, to have our vests, and we would have these little crowns that you would earn your jewels if you memorized all your verses. And I just remember beating myself up if I would like fumble over the words because I didn't think I would get that same jewel. And it was a really big deal for me. Whereas the other kids, they're like, we're here for the ice cream parties and whatever. But I was like, I'm getting into heaven and I'm getting my crown jewels. Like,
Yes.
It was just very much like, I have to do the best. Right.
I say often too that there are certain personality types that can get into a kind of negative cycle within Christianity. Having a perfectionist bent is fine, but when you add on top of that kind of a religious element, that can be dangerous.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, like, I would like to think that the people that were in leadership were just teaching what they thought was truth. They weren't like being malicious, but there was a very big push towards our sin and our unworthiness. Mm-hmm. And so being a perfectionist, I would cling. I mean, I have notebooks and several old Bibles where all I did was highlight and write notes. And I look back through that stuff now and I'm like, I was so broken and I thought that should be celebrated. And like the idea of suffering, like that martyrdom is like seeking after Christ as hard as you can, you know? So you really want to be broken and you want to feel like nothing. And man, did I. And I just had no idea what that was doing to my psyche for when I would come out of it.
Right. Wow.
So that was interesting to really realize. But so Calvary Chapel was a big deal for me. As soon as I hit middle school, I got to be in the youth group, which was like a rite of passage, and we were so excited. But you know, that's when your brain starts thinking differently. You're not as easily influenced as you are when you're younger. And so we started having our own thoughts, and we had to have our little bouts of rebellion. And I always noticed that I was drawn to, I guess, what would be considered darker things. And I remember going to my pastor because I had been having dreams. And I was like, something's really weird. I have dreams and they happen, or I have a lot of deja vu. Like, I'm really drawn to the occult. What in the world is going on here? And he was like, well, you're a woman, so you can't, well, female, you can't have, you know, spiritual gifts of that caliber. So It must be witchcraft. And I was like, witchcraft? Because, you know, at this point, that's like so far the opposite. I was just terrified of the word even. And of course, it being like rapture culture and like everything being about the mark of the beast and 666. I was like, I don't have anything to do with witchcraft or the devil. Like, what are you talking about? And so it was basically a lot of like, any of your natural instincts, completely disregard them because they're sinful, especially because you're female. So you really need to like latch onto some sort of male authority to kind of guide you. So of course we had youth pastors, and I have personal relationships with them now as in the place I am in my life. And I really clung to them. At this time, my family started to unravel and my parents ended up divorcing.
Okay.
And my mom moved back to the East Coast and she took my brother and I. And I only lasted like 6 months, I think. I mean, honestly, I feel like so much of that time, there was so much trauma I have honestly forgotten or kind of muddled a lot of it. But my dad, he stayed back on the West Coast, and he said he asked my mom to take us so we wouldn't feel abandoned. Mm-hmm. And around this time, I really started to understand that my mom suffered from mental issues. Okay. And I couldn't handle a lot of what was going on where we were living. And so I dealt with a lot of identity issues too, because my dad's white and I grew up in a white community, and my mom is Black and Puerto Rican. And I was all of a sudden immersed in this Black culture that I had never experienced, and I did not fit in at all. And even the Black church culture was entirely different than Calvary Chapel. So I was all of a sudden in like a Black African Methodist church. Okay. Which was like hooping and hollering and fire and brimstone and church fashion shows. And it was just entirely different. And so I was like, what in the world is this? And there's really, these people are going to be in heaven with us too. Like I could not wrap my brain around. Yeah. There's just so many different sects, right? Yeah, and so I was like, okay, I guess we're doing this. But I just really couldn't fit in. And I was just very timid, and I really started to feel rejection around that age. I ended up developing an eating disorder around that time. And a lot of that was lack of control in my life. And that was something that I could control. So that really spun all around. And I ended up calling my dad and was like, I can't do this anymore. Can I please come back and live with you? So he came back, like, I think it was probably like 2 or 3 days later kind of thing. He came and got me. And then I moved back to the West Coast with him. And it was just us, and we were in church, and that was really my foundation. And that was the only thing that was normal for me. It was like my people again. And I really, really immersed myself. And during this time, this was when trying to think of some of the bands. I guess it would have been like Skillet and oh my goodness, there's this one I can't think of right now. They were kind of mainstream, but they also were Christians. But that was like my version of rebellion, was like the Christian rock, right?
Yeah.
So I connected with friends again at Calvary and really just got involved at the youth group. And eventually my mom would really get into a breakdown, and my dad kind of cut things off. She actually ended up dating a woman, which was something that I was raised that's completely wrong.
Okay.
And so I had an aunt who was gay, and I knew her partner, but it was always very much not talked about. It was just like, oh, that's her friend, but I knew, you know.
Yeah.
So
very close friend.
yes, yeah, exactly. So my dad really struggled, and at that time he didn't really open up to me, rightfully so, because I was so young, about really what the demise of their marriage was. But gosh, there was just so much in there that formed. My dad is not my brother's biological dad. He met my mom when she was pregnant.
Okay.
And that kind of built up where there was all of a sudden another guy that I was like, what is happening? Like, I didn't understand that, because I was taught you couldn't have sex till you were married.
Right.
So therefore you can't get pregnant till you're married. So I was like, mom was married before. Like, there was just so many things that did not add up to my little brain. And I would just pray. I would always be praying, like, for understanding, for wisdom, stuff way beyond what, at that age I should have been thinking about.
Yeah.
So a bunch of stuff happened with my parents. My dad just got really hard-hearted, and it was different for me because he wasn't that way before. I remember having a very close relationship with him, and he was just always very, like, physically affectionate, open with when I would need to come to him with fears or whatever. And then when that happened, it really changed him. And he all of a sudden was like, control of me, because I was the only one left.
I see.
So it was like, no makeup, loose clothing, don't talk to boys. I mean, so far as he probably doesn't remember this, but in 7th grade, I had a PE class where we were learning different dance styles over a 6-week course. And because my partner would have to be male, I was told I couldn't participate. So instead, I had to sit in my gym class, like the office, and write reports on each style of dance.
Okay.
And so it was just very much like, your life needs to be about Jesus. Your life needs to be about making me happy and not, upsetting me. At least this is how I interpreted it.
Yeah.
And just stay in line. No boys, period. Don't think about them. Don't talk to them. Nothing. Right? Right at puberty.
Yes. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. So that really didn't end up staying that way for long. I ended up making a really good group of friends that we kind of walked through life together for a while. And then high school came, and, we had been doing camps and concerts and just really pouring into the church. And then they ended up creating an internship at our church. And it was like the coveted thing. Everybody wanted to graduate high school and get accepted into this internship. So like freshman year was when they would really kind of start looking at who was going to be basically that next generation, right? So we were in worship training, and I mean, I had friends that were singing on the worship team, and that was a big deal. Like you got to be on the stage, and that was huge. I was very much a rooting for everyone else, and I want your life to be really good, and I'm going to be the best support that I can be, and it's okay to be the background. So I kind of didn't really connect probably as closely as everybody else did once all of that stuff started happening. And I ended up finding my connection with a boy in high school. I met a boy in 10th grade. Actually, it would have been freshman year. I met him the second half of freshman year. And we were just friends. We were in class together. And then we started dating our sophomore year. And I ended up pregnant my sophomore year.
Oh, okay.
It was very quick. And everyone was shocked because I was such a Bible thumper. I was literally like leading worship at my school, and we would do like see you at the pole. I don't know if you're aware of what that is.
I've heard of it. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was like coordinating that stuff. Like it was just very much a double-sided life. And I would be like confessing at church that I was hanging out with a boy the night before. And we, like I said, we were in a relationship. It wasn't like a random thing, but it was still very much, we were kids and shouldn't have been doing that. But I was also very much longing for that like family and that love.
Yeah.
And my mom was still absent at this point. There was quite a period of time where we didn't even talk, several years. And I ended up pregnant, and that completely changed my life. I was raised where, you know, pro-life, very pro-life, never ever even consider abortion, birth control, anything like that. Of course, my dad was beyond devastated and very angry. He actually, like, I mean, I honestly think that was another switch, kind of like how I said when him and my mom separated. He said he had actually gone into the Calvary Chapel at the time and was like, I need to just sit in the sanctuary and pray. Like, I need to feel close to God here. And they were like, well, it's like Tuesday morning, you know, like it was a random day. They're like, we don't open. And this is a church that we had been not only involved in and going to, but like regular tithers, like they knew us. There was no, and again, this is a prominently white community. There was one other Black male there, and then there was my mom. Mm-hmm. Like they knew our family. So we had, I wouldn't say connections, but I mean, like there was no reason for them to be weirded out that my dad would want that. So he was like, can I talk to the pastor? And they were like, well, you have to have a meeting kind of thing, like schedule a meeting. And my dad was like, if there was a God, he wouldn't have let my daughter get pregnant. Mm. And I carried that for a long time.
Oh, wow. That is devastating.
Yeah, wow. It was hard. I thought for years to come after that, because I did keep the baby. She will be 16 this year.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. And she, I thought anytime anything would go wrong in my life, it was punishment. Anything. I mean, it could be as much as a flat tire. And God was like, well, you shouldn't have had that baby. Shouldn't have got pregnant. So that was always in the back of my mind. And there was kind of this really weird, like back and forth. So we got pregnant. We were still at the youth group. We, of course, had to tell them because eventually my body was going to tell them.
Yeah.
So I remember having a meeting with our pastor, with my boyfriend at the time and the pastor. And I said, you know, I'm pregnant. And I will never forget, this man said, well, I mean, it's a good example for everyone else of what happens when two hot and horny teenagers are in the room together.
Wow.
Verbatim.
Wow.
Okay. And so I was like, so are we allowed to stay? Like, I genuinely thought they were going to kick us out. But now in hindsight, I realized that was a testimony for them that they accepted these sinners.
Yeah.
So that was a huge moment in my life because I felt accepted, even though it wasn't genuine. Now I can see that.
And honestly, I mean, it was I've heard much worse than that. So,
Yeah,
it was good of them to not kick you out. That was
right.
better than in some circumstances. So, I agree with you that it's probably not genuine and for the wrong reasons. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And so we went through with the pregnancy, and I did have that group of friends. Their parents just absolutely wrapped their arms around us, loved us, furnished the nursery, and I mean just totally loved her. And I continued school for a little while, but I was really dedicated to being her mom. And so I eventually just got my GED and got out. Um, I had always had a heart to be um, in the medical field to some capacity. I initially wanted to be a cardiologist when I was young, but that's a lot of schooling. So
Yeah. Yeah.
that was not going to be in the cards for me at this point. But I knew I wanted to be a nurse at some point. I just didn't know how that was going to look. And then, so I had her right after I turned 16, and the church really impressed. You guys need to get married. This is a huge deal to have a baby outside of wedlock, and God's going to honor your life more if you walk in the way that He has designed.
Okay.
So we got married at 16.
Yeah. Wow.
And that was a big deal for my dad too. He didn't come. He left the state because like for the day, because it was just so devastating for him. So we had a full-blown wedding, like we were, 28 years old with careers and a life ahead of us.
Yeah.
And it was what I thought my life was going to be. I genuinely was in love with this boy and wanted my life with him. But there was this transition that happened where I was like, well, I'm not a kid anymore. I'm married, but I'm still a kid. So I'm still trying to do kid stuff, have sleepovers, go to youth group, go to camp. And they were like, okay, you guys can come to camp, but you cannot be in the same cabin. You need to act like you're not married. Right.
Right.
And that whole purity culture was so much fun for us at that point, because when we would have those sermons in youth group, we were like, ha ha, suckers,
Yeah.
we don't have to. And they'd be like, you guys have to quit joking.
Yes.
So
I love
yeah,
it.
yeah, we did that, and life was okay for a little bit. And then I got pregnant again at 17.
Oh, wow.
And
Okay.
in my brain, I'm like, this is normal. We're married and I'm allowed to have another baby if I want to. So we had another baby, and we went through a rough patch that go. Like we were kind of like changing again, young adults changing. I believe I was 18 when I had him. Yeah, I got pregnant at 17 and had him when I was 18. And
Okay.
we were like, we got to do something different. These dead end jobs aren't working. So he joined the Army, and we did that life. So at this point, I moved from the West Coast all the way to Fort Stewart, Georgia. And it was the first time in my life that I had really been away from everything, where I didn't have a parent and all the adults around me were not Christians. And I was in complete culture shock again.
Interesting.
Yeah. So he comes in, as a private, and we're like away from family and away from our community and, quite frankly, accountability. And we just went nuts. We were drinking, we were partying, and we have babies, right? But that's just the lifestyle. And there was all young couples. So then we also felt accepted there because, you're 18 and you're dating your high school sweetheart, marry them so they can come with you in the Army. So we had a lot of friends that were the same age, and some of them had kids, some of them didn't. And that first deployment came around, and it sobered me. I was like, he could die. And that kind of brought me back around to the Christianity. Like, I need to take this serious, because if I'm praying for him, my prayers aren't going to be heard if I'm sinning.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
So I connected to a Calvary Chapel there, and I made a really close friend who's still one of my closest friends, and really immersed myself again. I was teaching and dealing with women. Of course, we weren't allowed to teach over men. Okay. And kids, and just working in the nursery. And that deployment went by and unscathed. He didn't have anything crazy happen that go around. And he came back and I was like, I want another baby. And at this point, I'm barely 20.
Wow. Yeah.
And he's like, I don't want another baby. And I was like, well, please. And he said, okay, you have like a month to try. And if it doesn't happen, then we're not having any more kids. I was pregnant in 2 weeks. Okay. And yeah, that happened. And we had our third baby.
Okay.
And at this point, we got stationed in Missouri. So we moved and he joined a new unit that was going to be deploying soon. And it was a different time. This was Afghanistan instead of Iraq. So we knew it was going to be a little bit hairier.
Yeah.
So he ended up deploying. He was not there for the birth because he was training for deployment. I had like an emergency C-section, really scary. And again, still leaning on my faith, like, well, God is obviously orchestrating all of this stuff in our life. So I have to trust these things. And like, I wouldn't make decisions, even split decisions that needed to be made right then. I was like, well, I have to pray about it. I have to see what God wants. And then even when I would feel like, oh, God's telling me this, I would need other reassurance from mostly Christian men, because that's what I had been told. So we got involved in a church there and actually took over the youth group. He acted as the youth pastor because it was really small, maybe 10, 15 kids. And I was just the wife, I guess, and leader. And so I dealt with the girls, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And we really enjoyed it. We tried, but I remember those kids asked a lot more questions than we did in youth group. They were like, well, this doesn't add up. And what about this? And why did God allow this? And then there was just a lot more loss in their lives that they were like, why would God let my mom die? Why, and I just didn't have answers for that.
Right. And
we ended up going through the second deployment and I was still very heavily involved. I was on the worship team. He also played drums for our worship team when he was home, and we really loved our church and we had bought a house. Like, honestly, life felt like it was supposed to be at that point.
Yeah.
And then my son, my third child, got really sick and his kidneys went into failure. And he was in Afghanistan. We had to have Red Cross send him home. And I didn't understand because, again, I'm thinking I'm being punished for having this baby at 16. And my dad didn't want anything to do with me. I just really thought everything was just piling on and God was finally like, all right, you don't get anything else. And so I remember begging God, like, please do not let my baby die. It was so rapid that he had gotten sick. And ironically enough, the morning that we ended up having to send him up to the children's hospital 2 hours away, I had been scheduled to get a hysterectomy and I had to cancel that. So husband comes home. Guess who ends up pregnant again?
Oh, wow. Okay.
And I'm like, look at what God's doing. He's giving us another life. Baby got better. It was a really weird fluke thing that they should have caught at birth, but they didn't. And it was easily fixed. And then it kind of reversed everything. And
okay. So he's fine now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, great.
He actually just turned 11. So yeah, he went back to Afghanistan after having been home for like a month, I believe. And I found out I was pregnant and we were just like, this isn't real. Like, I was supposed to get, everything taken out so this wouldn't happen. And of course, pro-life. And so we had our fourth child. He also was not there for that birth. And it was just a lot. At that point, I think they were probably 6 and under. I had like 4 that were 6 and under. And I was 23 and just exhausted. And I heavily relied on the church. everything kind of started to take a turn at that point. I was starting to have a lot of questions myself and wondering why I would pray and ask for certain things, beg God, and there would be no change. We lost several friends, army wise during that time, Christian families too. And I didn't understand. We had friends whose children randomly died from cancers. And I was like, what is going on, Lord? Like, why, And I would just, I remember turning on worship music in my house and just watching my kids worship, not realizing that was just indoctrination, and thinking, wow, this is such a beautiful life, even with all the loss. And I would constantly remind myself, that God gives and he takes away, and blessed be his name, no matter what's happening.
Yeah.
And it was just a really sobering moment when it all came crashing down. And I found out that my best friend that I had up on a pedestal, the love of my life, the father of my kids, was cheating. I had no idea where to go from there. I mean, this was like, everyone's going to know. Like, I couldn't put it together in my brain, because at this point, this is the only man I had ever been with in any capacity.
Right.
So I was just shattered. And I had been told, if you walk in these ways, God's going to bless your life. And so I just thought we were immune to everything. And I remember having to tell my pastor, we're going to have to step down because this is going on. And it was devastating. And I ended up, he was away at school when this all came to pass. And I was like, come home or it's over. And so he came home right away. And I kind of took a sabbatical. I was like, right before our fourth turned 1, I missed his first birthday because I was like, I'm going home and I'm going to figure out who I am and what I want.
Yeah.
So I flew home for like 3 weeks, and honestly, the whole thing was a blur. I slept for a lot of it, and I kind of just wandered. I walked for miles, and I was just like, is there a God? Like, what is so, I guess I am unworthy. Like, what is so unlovable in me that my dad doesn't want anything to do with me? This man that I gave up my family for doesn't obviously love me because he's done this. I've got 4 kids. I've lost complete sense of who I am as a person. I couldn't even have told you at that point what my hobbies were. Everything was wife and mom.
Yeah.
And again, I'm like 24 at this point. I mean, my counterparts are all like graduating with their degrees and like starting life and no children. And I'm just like, who am I? I feel like I should be 10 years older, and I don't know what's going on. And so we ended up starting counseling. I came back in Christian counseling, of course, a male Christian counselor. And he probably was the reason I woke up. He told me, well, what are you not doing that your husband would cheat on you?
Oh, wow. Oh, man. I am so sorry.
I was like, what is this? This is not real. Like, it was kind of just like, I think it just hit me where I was like, there's got to be some sort of self-worth inside of you to where you're going to realize that this isn't the way.
Yeah.
And it really started to shake up my foundation quite a bit. We still went to church, and everything was worship, and I really resonated with music. Worship music was everything for me because of that emotional experience. And we were still friends. We had our little pack of army people, and we had this party one night where my husband at the time was super drunk and had said some really awful things to me that were also like, whoa, I'm not going to deal with this. And I watched my whole friend group turn on me because I was asking for them to hold him accountable for the things he had said. And we ended up going home, just the kids and I went back to get him the next day, and he like wouldn't talk to me. And I was like, what is going on with you? Like, I didn't recognize anything or anyone anymore. It was just very much like, I don't know who we are, what we're doing here. We're growing apart. What is going on? You don't want anything to do with Jesus. Like, what is happening? And he looked me dead in the eye and was like, I don't want to go to church anymore. I don't want to do this. This has been an act. It was initially to get you, basically. And then I thought maybe it was real. And then I didn't want it. Like, he just was going through his own process.
Oh, wow. Okay.
But I had such a devotion to him that I was like, whatever you want, we'll do it. I just can't live without you.
So you were in the middle of going through your own doubts, having, youth group kids ask hard questions, having questions of yourself, having the devastation of a partner cheating on you, the mom of 4 children, and then your partner tells you that he doesn't believe. So were you angry at all? Like, was it like, I know you wanted to be with him at pretty much all costs, but like, what was your reaction?
Yeah, I was angry, but honestly, there was a little bit of relief because it was like, okay, this person who's in authority over me is also feeling the same doubt that I'm feeling. So I can't be that crazy.
Yeah.
Of course, I never vocalized that at that point, because I was afraid, it's so funny because growing up, I thought, God could hear all my thoughts. But then I would also be like, well, if I don't say it out loud, it's not
Yes.
real for God,
Right.
So yeah, I was really more fearful of what our life would look like. And quite frankly, how everybody else was going to respond, because accountability was huge. That was a huge part of me growing up. And that was what we were really like drilled into our heads. It was like, you need to have somebody that's helping you stay on track. So I'm like, good grief, these people are going to be like, you just let this person change everything about who you are. And you can't do that. God should be number one. And so I kind of backed off of a lot of people. And of course, like Facebook at this point was like my diary because I was young.
Yeah.
And I didn't. So gosh, I look back at that stuff now and I'm like, gross. I hate all of this. I hate it all.
Yes.
But yeah, we kind of just backed off from everything and everyone and just kind of stopped going to church. And I'm sure people reached out. I don't remember, to be honest with you. But I really missed that spiritual aspect of my life. And so I was like, well, what about witchcraft?
Okay.
I was told once.
Yeah.
So I had no idea what I was doing. I was just like looking at everything online and was like remembering Hollywood's depiction of like the craft and everything. And I was like, well, if I just do it, but I don't touch any of the dark stuff, then it's not, and then I was like, ooh, maybe I do want to touch the dark stuff because I want to be rebellious, So I kind of just dove in like head first.
Okay.
And it was funny because my partner, my husband at the time, he was adamant that there was no God, but he was like, do not do any of that stuff with me home. Like, it terrifies me.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
So I dove head first. My kids were little. They were kind of trying to figure out, all right, we don't go to church anymore. We don't play the same music. And mom's constantly got candles burning and like incense and is like doing weird stuff. Right.
Yeah.
So it was quite the swing and pendulum. Like, it was just the other side. So then I got really brave and I was like, I'm getting on Facebook and I am announcing that I'm a witch. Okay. And my friends lost it.
I can imagine. Yeah.
And so I had family members, friends that were like, what are you doing? Who are you? And, I'm like all about like celebrating pride in life and like everybody can be who, because I just am like seeing a whole new side of the world where there's people who live in this world and they don't have this fear of death or hell looming over them. And, so I'm just like, yeah, celebrate everything. And it just felt really free. And then I quickly realized that it really didn't matter what path I was on religious wise. There was a lot inside of me that was just broken and none of that was filling it. So I also realized that I had basically turned myself into who my spouse wanted me to be. And I really couldn't maintain it It wasn't at all something that I could like continue with. So we ended up separating a couple of times. Like, we're not together, we are together. It was really like all over the place, but we were kind of stuck because we were stationed there. And like, so he would stay at a friend's or I would stay at a friend, it was like that. And I was starting to like regain an idea of who I was and still being a mom and like my kids being everything. I wasn't really working real jobs. I would have little things here and there. I'd done some schooling and he just worked and we were just so like intertwined in our lives, like our families and our friends. There was really no escaping each other. And then finally, there was just this point that hit that we were like, we need to get divorced. And I don't think that moment would have come had I stayed in the church because, divorce is a big no-no.
Sure. Yeah.
So we ended up divorcing. And right around the time that we had separated, before like we had signed papers and everything, one of our mutual friends passed away tragically in a motorcycle accident.
Sorry.
And we decided to go to the funeral together. It was a few hours away and we drove and we had only taken 2 of our older kids with us. At the time too, we had taken his younger sister on as our child. And she was in high school at the time. So we were helping raise her because of some family stuff. But she kept the younger kids and we went to this funeral. And the funeral was for one of our female friends who had left behind a husband and children. They were separated as well. She actually passed with the guy that she was dating.
Okay.
And we kind of went to check on the kids to make sure that they were okay. And they seemed like they were doing great. During this time, I ended up feeling this draw to this family because I had such a fixed savior complex that I thought, oh my goodness, I don't know if it's the universe or if God, like I wasn't sure. I think they're telling me to latch to this family in some capacity. So fast forward a few weeks and my brain, which wants this feeling and heart wants this feeling of belonging and connectedness, falls for this man.
Okay. The widower. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. And it was mutual, a lot of trauma there. So I think there was like a bond that formed with that. And my soon to be ex-husband at that point had moved. He got stationed back on the West Coast. And I was like, I'm going to stay in the Midwest because I want to see what happens with this. I think that this could be something and I could finally be the answer to somebody's prayer or problem.
Okay.
So I'm, this whole time I'm pursuing what I've been taught to believe that I should be a wife and I should be a nurturer and a mother and I should, be totally dependent on a male that loves the Lord and is going to love me the way Christ loved the church. That's all I had known.
Right.
So it was still in my head, even though I had stepped away from it, it was still like, oh my goodness, maybe this is a way back in. And it was a whirlwind. We ended up hanging out a couple of times and then I moved there and we were together. I moved in with my kids and I saw his acceptance of me and 4 children, and he had 3 children at the time. I saw that as just like a beautiful thing. I used to tell people our story is like Jesus or Jerry Springer, depending on depending on your view, right, of the world. Yes. And it was so easy to think that God had woven this beautiful tapestry of like our family still being connected and this woman that I loved that passed, I'm able to love her children and maybe heal the trauma that was between the two. It was just really messed up.
Yeah. A bit of trauma bonding, like you said.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. And so, yeah, it was just real whirlwind. And of course, everyone around us with a brain was like, this is awful. What are you doing? From both sides. But we were like, that's just the enemy trying to pull us apart.
Yeah.
So we ended up pregnant pretty close after getting together, after barely really knowing each other. I mean, I had met him a couple of times previously because he was married to a friend, but there wasn't a whole lot of interaction. And we were just like, oh my gosh, God is just doing so much. And we connected in his church. And they, of course, were like, we've been praying for a woman like you, for him and his children, and da da da. So yeah, I, of course, had to get married again because I can't have another baby out of wedlock. Right. So I got divorced and remarried all within like 3 months or 4 months of each other.
Okay.
And I was not going to let one. This was going to be my way back in with God, and like how much God relentlessly pursued me and didn't care that I had not only stepped out of the faith, but went all the way to witchcraft. How dare me? And then we had a lot of problems. There was a lot of control and a lot of abuse that I had not experienced in my previous relationship.
Yeah.
That I immediately recognized because it was so like, whoa, what is this? But I'm being told, you know, well, I love you, and he just didn't love you the right way. That's why you never heard these things and experienced these things. And so we went through a lot. His kids had a lot of trauma from their mom passing. There was a lot. His family was not about me at all. We were living in the South, and there was a lot of racism, and it was just a lot. My kids were in culture shock from like the education standards where we were, and the medical it was just a lot. And of course, this martyr idea in my head of, well, we're suffering for Christ, so this is okay. And our church there really kind of went with the same thing. Like, you were just such a lover of Jesus, and we, you know, to take in this family, and for, you know, it was just really being portrayed as this beautiful story. And I would always feel guilty when there was this thing in the back of my head that was like, no, this is not okay. There ended up being really bad stuff that happened. My kids were being abused and I didn't know.
Oh no. Wow.
And a lot of mental abuse was happening from his family with me, and it was just really bad. And right when I got brave enough to really be like, this isn't working, I got pregnant again. Baby number 6.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was livid, and I contemplated an abortion and just not telling him. And I was like, I'm not having another kid. Like, definitely not with him. Definitely not at all. This needs to be done. And I just couldn't. So of course I told him, and he's probably thrilled because he's like, man, she really can't leave if she's got 2 kids.
No. Yeah.
So I just continued to play the part. At this point, I was pregnant so it would have been 9 between us. We had them all the time, and COVID hit.
Oh.
And I had to homeschool 9 or 8 children.
Yeah.
And it was a lot, and we had so many issues, but just in the spirit of keeping his minors, you know, anonymous and like their issues, there was a lot that went on that is not okay, and had to have like legal entities involved.
Got it.
So we just really got to the point where my kids were like, I could just see a change in their behavior. And my daughter has epilepsy, and her seizures were picking up, and I was like, we're just stressed, like this is not healthy. So I have the church telling me, no, you need to walk through this. You need to pray harder. You need to have more faith. You need to understand that this is your lot in life. And I was really fed the idea of Boaz and Ruth,
Mm-hmm.
and this spouse being my kinsman redeemer.
Oh, no.
So I'm looking, you know, thinking I'm just ungrateful. I am just ungrateful and unworthy. And I don't even realize how blessed I am. And finally, I kind of snapped out of that nonsense when we had a specific situation happen, and the kids and I left, and I actually took his oldest, who is not biologically his, but he's been raising her, and since her mom passed, So I took her with me and we went and stayed at like a little Airbnb. And that's when I got some clarity. I don't know if it was my own brain finally being clear. I can't specifically say I don't know if there's a God or what's happening up there, but something very loudly was like, get out.
Right.
And I was like, all right, well, I have no means to financially support my children. I'm thousands of miles away from home. If I were to leave, I have a van. What I can fit in the van is what I can take. So that's what I did.
Wow.
I packed my kids up and I drove across the country. And luckily, I had friends that loved me still and watched the abuse cycles and was like, no, come here, stay with us. We'll help you get on your feet.
Oh, good for them.
Yeah. So I came out here and I was like, no more God, no more church, nothing. And at that point, it wasn't like, oh, I'm mad at God and I'm mad. It was just like, I need a break. I need to breathe and I need to think.
Yeah.
And I don't want all of these different influences to determine how I go from here. Because I've already walked away once and I need to make sure that I know what I want.
Yeah. And the theme of your story is the church asserting male dominance or male authority on your life when you needed to be able to make your own decisions at each of those points throughout your life.
Yeah. So I got here and I immediately got a job and I knew I was like, man, I have 6 children. I have to change things drastically. And I was going to have to go back to school and I was going to have to really figure out what was going to work and how to still pour into their lives, because this whole time they've only known a stay-at-home mom. And now I have like literally none of my kids had ever been to daycare one single day in their life.
Right.
And now I'm going to have to put my babies, the little ones, in daycare and the other ones in school. And it was just a lot of transition. And I quickly realized that I hadn't really gotten over the trauma from my first marriage or a lot of stuff from my childhood. So I did some counseling and I was very lucky that my first ex-husband, his family was here and we had remained very close throughout everything. Okay. So they helped quite a bit with all my children, even the 2 that are not from him.
Okay.
And then he chose to move back up here to be close to his kids. And we kind of dealt with our issues, and he's very much not about God anymore and was very hesitant, was like, I don't want my kids raised in that mindset. So if we're going to do this, we're going to have to be on the same page with that.
Right.
And so we've kind of created this weird little co-parenting situation. And the kids are doing much better. I mean, they have told me, oh, I'm so glad that we don't go to church. And some of them have some pretty heavy trauma. Some of them won't wear collared shirts anymore because we had been at a Presbyterian church for a while and they were just like, no, we're not dressing up anymore. And,
interesting.
Yeah. So I've watched my kids come out of it. My daughter still struggles. She's quite the perfectionist. She's quite the people pleaser, like her mother.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that she is coming around. She kind of has had one of her best friends is gay. So she has been like, well, I don't agree with that part of the Bible, So I'm like, oh, well, maybe start thinking, other things.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, it's been a journey of not being okay with not knowing.
Yeah.
And not feeling like I have to constantly be performing. I still struggle with that every day. I don't have as many thoughts of like, oh man, what if I die and there is a heaven and there is a hell. I don't have as many of those thoughts anymore. I still am on a pagan path.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of my own. I'm not Wiccan. I'm not like, it's just kind of is what it is.
Yeah.
I have a couple of prerequisites to finish, and I will be applying to a nursing program.
Oh, fantastic.
So I'm pretty excited about that. So I'm around death quite a bit now. I work at a hospital here, and I definitely have an entirely different appreciation of all different walks of life, because I meet people from all different walks of life and all different ages. And I just see things from a more scientific perspective now. And when things happen, I'm like, well, that's just how our bodies do this, or that's how the psyche works, or, it's, and not just like, well, God's doing this, or God took his hand off of this, so that's why that's happening, or.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I imagine the sense of not being punished or not being judged constantly, it would be a relief as well.
Absolutely. And I think too, for the longest, it was impossible for me to accept any type of compliment, because it felt like pride. So I've kind of been completely ushered into this role now, in the department that I'm in, where my role is very important. And I had this whole what is that called when imposter syndrome?
Yes. Yeah.
The first time I sat in the room with the surgeons and whatnot, I was like, ooh, I think I came in the wrong room. I shouldn't be in here. And it's bizarre to have them know me by name, and the nurses to praise me so highly, and to allow me to be, because right now I'm a nurse assistant, so I'm learning a lot. And it's been really neat to have people that don't know me and don't have any reason to fluff me up for no reason, to be like, hey, you're a great contribution to this team, or hey, you can make decisions on your own. And being a nurse requires autonomy, and we, so it's been a whole different view to see, like, there isn't this male entity that's just waiting for me to mess up and show me why I should have done it his way.
Yes. And you can be proud of the hard work that you put in to get where you're at now.
Exactly.
That was a long road that took probably lots and lots of decisions to get there. And you know that those were your choices. You made those choices to get there.
Right. Yeah. And I think too, my parents, I'm really trying to rebuild a relationship with my dad right now. And he has apologized to me for raising me that way, and for things, kind of that have directed where my train of thought is now with a lot of things. And we've had some disagreements, and we've had times where we haven't spoken because he didn't agree with the choices I was making. And that was really hard, but we're coming around. And my mom is still, everything's Jesus. Jesus is her husband. She texts me or messages me daily verses.
Right.
And I will say, Mom, please stop sending these things. Or she'll text my teenage kids that stuff, and they're like, please stop texting me these things. But of course, that's just more of a challenge of well, I have to pursue them harder. So that's still something where I have to tell people. And now I'm kind of okay with, I don't have to tell everybody, hey, I'm not doing this anymore.
Right.
But if it's persistent and they're like, what are you doing with your life? I'm like, not that. So it's okay. Yeah.
Yes. As kind of a wrap-up question, then, I think another part of the theme of your life is that search for connection with other people. How are you fulfilling that? Is there a community? Are there friendships?
I think I'm fulfilling it with my patients right now.
Okay.
I don't really hang out with anybody. I spend a lot of time with my kids. Strangely enough, I've built a friendship with my ex-husband's girlfriend.
Okay.
Because we have to parent together.
Yeah.
I probably talk to 3 people regularly, and she's one of them.
Okay.
But no, I spend a lot of time just I like to listen to other people, my patients, and hear their life, because I work in day surgery, so they're there for all kinds of things.
Right.
And I really feel like by the end of the day, I'm peopled out.
Yes.
and I need to just retreat and just be with my kids and allow things to unfold how they're going to. But it's been a wild ride and I have a long ways to go. But and as far as my beliefs now, like I was saying, it's definitely not, I don't know what there is, and I'm okay with that.
Honestly, the humility, the recognition of what we don't know is really a significant move, right? It's really important.
Yeah, for sure. And I definitely want to raise my kids with, I want them to have like altruism and empathy and just genuine love for people, but also knowing that they don't have to take crap from people.
Yes.
Because that was not instilled in me. So I still have to tell myself, no, it's okay to have a backbone and say no.
Yes. Yes.
You're not going to go to hell for that.
That's right.
Yeah.
Cooper, thank you so much for telling your story. This was a wild ride, and I appreciate just the honesty to go through all the details of your life. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
Final thoughts on the episode. As Cooper said herself, this was a wild ride. I really appreciate Cooper telling her story in such a way that we can see the trajectory from being a young child and living under the perfectionism that Christianity induces in a person, and then being told over and over and over again that she needed to sit under the authority of this man or that man, and always feeling obligated to do so. Her stories of being a young child really broke my heart too, in that the perfectionism, looking for something to confess. The first time she admitted that she was drawn to dark things, being accused of witchcraft, is just utterly painful. I can't imagine what that must have been like. You can hear the passion that Cooper has for her kids and the need that she had throughout her life to protect them, to make sure that they were taken care of. Cooper's story is one of autonomy, or the discovery of autonomy. It's exciting to hear that the deconstruction that went beyond just the religious aspects, but also to recognize that Cooper is her own human being, that she can make her own decisions for her life and has some control over which direction her life goes, that she doesn't have to listen to the man who happens to be nearest to her. I want to thank Cooper for being on the podcast, for telling her story with such honesty and letting us really feel what it was like going through her life. Thank you, Cooper, so much for being on the podcast. The secular grace thought of the week is returning to the idea of the sanctity of our own minds. What we think internally is ours and ours alone, that we own that we don't owe anyone else information about how we are thinking, and no one else can judge us for our own internal thoughts. This ties into Cooper's story of autonomy, that there are no taboo subjects. If you want to explore quote unquote dark things, you are free to do so. If you want to explore your doubts, you are free to do so. You are not obligated to anyone else but yourself. This ties into deconstruction because there is so much pressure from the church to only deconstruct so much, only question so much. You can only have a dark night of the soul for so long, and then you need to begin to accept the answers that you receive. And some of those answers aren't going to be sufficient for you, and that is okay. That is the whole message of this podcast, that you are not alone. For many of us, the answers began to be unsatisfying and unacceptable, and we moved on, and you can as well. And it begins with being honest with yourself, being able to question the things around you and not feeling obligated to conform to what everyone else wants you to be. You can be honest with yourself. You have the privacy of your own thoughts, and you can explore as much as you want there. Obviously, when you are ready to talk to other human beings, having a safe community to do so is useful. And I'll just plug here again the Deconversion Anonymous Facebook group and the community that Arlene is building there. It is amazing, the empathy that gets poured out literally every week. I am astonished and very happily surprised to see how well the community is gelling together. If you want to be a part of that, that's at facebook.com/groups/deconversion. We have a number of really interesting interviews lined up, including authors and community members and many others I'll mention here. I just interviewed Doug Traversa, who is a former Unitarian Universalist pastor, but he was an atheist all the way from seminary through his entire time in the pulpit, and that was known and accepted within the UU Church. He is a lot of fun to talk to, so that episode will be coming up soon. Until then, my name is David, and I am trying to be the graceful atheist. Join me and be graceful human beings. Time for the footnotes. The beat is called Waves from Mackay Beats. Links will be in the show notes. If you'd like to support the podcast, you can promote it on your social media. You can subscribe to it in your favorite podcast application, and you can rate and review it on podchaser.com. You can also support the podcast by clicking on the affiliate links for books on gracefulatheist.com. If you have podcast production experience and you would like to participate with the podcast, please get in touch with me. Have you gone through a faith transition and do you need to tell your story? Reach out. If you are a creator or work in the deconstruction, deconversion, or secular humanism spaces and would like to be on the podcast, just ask. If you'd like to financially support the podcast, there's links in the show notes. To find me, you can Google Graceful Atheist, you can Google deconversion, you can Google secular grace, you can send me an email, gracefulatheist@gmail.com, or you can check out the website, gracefulatheist.com. My name is David, and I am trying to be the graceful atheist. Join me and be graceful human beings. This has been the Graceful Atheist Podcast.